Dun dun dun! Hello everyone, my name is Exabu with the 7th DLC to Unit of Command 2, which is Don 42. And as you may have guessed, it is a successor to Moscow 41 in that it covers the Soviet Red Army offensive operations starting with Uranus, oh this joke never gets old, and into February 1943 when the German counteroffensive stopped the streak of Soviet successes, even though the DLC goes into alternative history and allows you to stop the Germans stopping you. At the time I'm recording this, I have completed 10 out of the 11 missions in this rather small campaign, even though it's pretty comparable to Moscow 41. And for someone who has played and completed the Stalingrad campaign, it has been a very enjoyable breeze, retreading my steps, all of the familiar locations like the Chir River, Milirovo, Stalingrad, obviously. And the missions themselves offer interesting challenges and unusual situations, especially in this wintry and vast area where even you, as the Red Army, sometimes need to stretch your forces thin or group them where it matters. After all, this is the place in the period where the last and successful mounted cavalry attacks happened, for a good reason. But then there's missions like Koltso, which is the destruction of Stalingrad pockets, which deprives you of your fast troops entirely and forces you to tighten the noose on the Germans more gradually. I also love how the campaign covers in detail this, though vast but reasonably compact area. It's nice to see so vividly the historical progress of these operations. It's not just Uranus, bam, you've got the pincer maneuvers and it's done. There is also a succession of offensives capitalizing on that success, and you can clearly see that in the campaign. You take the bank of the Chir River in Uranus, and then you cross that river in Little Saturn, and you go south, and then you see the ground you covered there in raids to Rostov, and then the far western reaches of that mission lead you to Gallup and Dnieper. It's all come nicely together, so if you're looking for a bit of a historical overview of the region during that specific period, this is a very nice campaign to look into. Now in today's video, my doodle guides will cover the first 3 conferences and 7 missions of the campaign. The difficulty level is reasonable to easy, even though Race to Rostov reminded me of some of the nasty bits like Edelweiss or Feilbraun. As usual, I highly recommend you to focus your prestige spending on HQ upgrades. Range is vital because some of these missions are huge, especially later in the game. Obviously level 2 engineering for bridging because you will need to build a lot of pontoon bridges out there. And of course operations level 2 seems obvious because of the feint and set piece attacks, but don't completely discount level 3. This campaign is full of fast units and units equipped with ski specialist steps, so that recon and force can become a game changer occasionally. Also, your earlier missions like Uranus and Kotelnikovo are great places to farm experience. Getting feint attacks, for example, that cost 1 command point could be incredible somewhere down the line. Finally, a note about the way I play these campaigns. I always play them on hard, so the advice I give should work for all difficulty levels. I also never buy cards, and I generally only use cards during missions when I get a new one and I'm already at the limit. And if I engage in any card shenanigans during these missions, I obviously mention that in the guides, which we should look at now. So Uranus is where it all starts, and in order for us to crack Uranus, we're gonna first look at the west of the map, because I found it to be a little tight. Jokes aside, the most critical element is taking the Liska River objective and kicking that German tank out of that objective, which means getting your tanks as close to Liska River by the end of turn 1 as possible. The rule of thumb is to have 2 tanks at least 4 hexes away from the Liska River. This will guarantee you 2 tank attacks on the defenders of that objective, and the 3rd tank will be able to actually take it. Once you're done with Liska, Kalach is not really protected, so you will be able to take it empty. However, you might find Chir River to be a source of nasty surprises. It is protected by 2 tank divisions and 1 cavalry division, and worse, the hex itself is a source of supply, so you won't be able to just cut them off and take them hungry. So my suggestion is to be pretty aggressive with your infantry on turn 1 north of Chir River. You'll need to be that to let your tanks through anyway, but make sure that infantry is as close to Chir River as possible, and it's a good idea to commit your cavalry to that particular objective, because you're really not going to need it for anything else. Now let's shift our sights to the east a little bit and look at Inner Ring, which, unlike the western objectives, is thankfully not going to be too difficult. I recommend you to use the Don HQ to set up a few pontoon bridges north and east of Inner Ring. Certainly don't try and break through on the eastern bank of the river. You're going to get counterattacked and will sustain unnecessary losses. But once you get that tank corps on the other side of the river, it's probably not going to be too difficult to kick whatever infantry the Germans manage to drag into that objective and just take it. It's easy. Finally, the easternmost objectives, including our favorite Abganerovo, and the initial goal here is to kill that Romanian unit with the engineers and that Romanian division in the middle. Only use your infantry to do that, and once those 2 holes are open, send your tanks and mechanized corps into those gaps and just don't let them stop. The deadlines for the Outer Ring and especially Savetsky objectives are clearly designed with making sure that you move those mechanized and tank corps all the time without fighting. The AI will almost certainly send a motorized division to do a little bit of counterattacking there. Try to block it with your infantry and destroy it. Once again, don't waste your mobile troops on any of those counterattacks. Unexpectedly, Little Saturn is probably the first mission in this campaign that really caters to the lovers of artillery strikes. I'm specifically talking about the little river bend next to Bakovskaya, where you've got direct contact with a bunch of weak enemies out in the open. So unholster your suppressive fire and destroy as many of those weaker tanks and Romanian troops as you can. And cross the river. Obviously, it's actually possible to take Bakovskaya on turn 1, but if you don't, no biggie, just repair that bridge and you have plenty of forces there to kick that German infantry division out. In any case, this will be your main source of supply in this mission, so start shifting your trucks from wherever they are into this area. In the area to the east, don't waste your troops holding all of those hexes around Surovikino, and obviously don't attack Surovikino, it's too well protected. Just move these guys to the west and possibly support the river crossing there. I've also found that leaving this opening in the front line often attracts enemy tank divisions, which generally is a better place for killing them rather than Tomasen or Morozovsk areas. Finally, in the west, the initial move is fairly straightforward. Cross the river and push towards Kantemirovka. If you can take Kantemirovka on your first turn, it's possible. Go for it. If you can't, there's always a turn 2. Also, I recommend you to pay attention to the units that belong to the Voronezh front, because obviously it is a pool of additional command points, so try to use that HQ as much as possible because Southwest is so overstretched. On turn 2, you are not going to have any trouble capturing Kantemirovka, but very importantly in this area, block the enemy reinforcement hexes north of Kantemirovka, and especially the one near Starobelsk. You really don't want that tank division showing up in the middle of the mission. At that point, the enemy front between Kantemirovka and Bakhovska should start collapsing, so your primary goal here for the rest of the mission will be to send your tanks east to connect with the main forces of the southwest front to encircle Milerovo. If you can bring some of the infantry from the west there, it's also a good idea. It tends to be a bit tricky, but thankfully it's not an urgent objective and you have enough time to starve its defenders. The rest of the mission will be in the east of the map, and what you should do starting with turn 2 will be to expand the Bakhovska bridgehead and push your troops south. It's also a good idea to use turn 2 to make your troops around Surovikino cross the river as well, with the aim of splitting the area of Morozovsk and Tormosin, just so that the Germans can't bring any reinforcements to prevent you from growing your bridgehead. From there on, send your infantry to hug Morozovsk and use your fast troops to bypass it and take Tatinska. I've found Tatinska to be the most frustrating objective of this mission, and in my experience, attempts at approaching it from the west across that river generally don't end in anything good, so push all of your fast troops past Morozovsk in the east. Given enough infantry and artillery/engineers, Morozovsk should not be too big of a problem, and once Tatinska is yours, just redirect your fast troops to clearing the area around Tormosin and ultimately taking it. Unlike what we saw in the Stalingrad DLC, Kotelnikovo is pretty much what Wintergewitzer looked like in real life, and the mission presents us with 2 immediate tasks. One, it's clearing Aksai Crossing and taking Zhutovo. I'm sure you've noticed that the tank has a counterattack token on it, so make sure you use suppressive fire on it a couple of times, because once the unit is suppressed and weak, the counterattack token will disappear, and you will be able to destroy that tank. Ideally, you should take Zhutovo first, so that the tank can't run away, and you can destroy it. With that done, your second task will be to stop the German advance elsewhere. Hand out AT guns to the defenders of Verkhnekumsky and that bridgehead leading to Logovsky. You can also plop at least 1 infantry unit between Verkhnekumsky and the German tanks, so that it creates an additional zone of control, preventing them from taking Verkhnekumsky on turn 1. After all, they don't have many mobile units, and a well-placed zone of control will stall their advance, as your own mechanized troop come in for the rescue. Although my suggestion is not to get too carried away destroying the German tanks. Send at least some of your fast troops along the railway towards Kotelnikovo and cut the supply of everyone east of it. Kotelnikovo itself, at least on hard, will probably be difficult to storm across the river, and I really don't recommend you to do it, especially since the deadline for this objective is pretty loose. So cut that Luftwaffe infantry from their supply by taking Dubovskaya, and wait for the infantry to come in and do its job taking Kotelnikovo. Just don't forget to put up your HQ as well, because that whole area is going to be pretty difficult to supply properly. While Koltso gives you all sorts of troops all around the huge pocket, the key to success here is sticking your dirty finger right into the heart of the city. And the trajectory for the finger sticking is going to be along the railway between Kotluban and Gumrak, which means that you should beef up the guys sitting next to Kotluban as well as you can. Transfer whatever tanks, engineers, Katyushas you can find on your units otherwise, thus preparing a solid attack force, and on turn 1, do everything you can to breach the German defenses there and advance as far as you can towards Gumrak. I found that taking it on turn 1 is not really necessary, but if you can, why not? As you may have guessed, the Univermag objective makes all of the enemy troops remaining on the map surrender, and it is tempting to rush it, but at least on hard, I found that objective is not really easy to take. So do gather your best troops around it, but don't expect to just crack the mission early this way. Back to turn 1. In the south, use the pretty good troops you have around Tsibenko to take that objective immediately. In the northeast, move all of your infantry towards Gorodiche and hug it. You won't be able to do anything about it for some time, and finally do the same about Karpovka. The Romanian cavalry there will cave under some pressure, so make sure you have enough infantry units around the objective for that pressure to be there on turn 2. Finally, try not to waste too many of your troops blocking the German motorized division in Marinovka. Just protect that supply hub and the AI will not be able to cause too much trouble with that division. Turn 2 is kind of pivotal for the mission, and apart from Karpovka, your main objective here will be to take all of the supply sources the Germans have. That is, with the exception of Pitomnik, which I've found the AI tends to protect with stronger units. So just rush all of your units in through the holes in the front line. Don't worry about the AI trying to maybe counterattack anything. The pocket should be collapsing at this point. Just block Pitomnik if it's not immediately takeable. From there on, all you'll have to do will be to bring engineers, don't forget they do set-piece attacks, artillery to Gorodiche, then Red October, then Univermag, and just kick the defenders out. Try to leave some space for them to retreat into, because since you don't have any mechanized units, you probably will not be able to one-shot kill any of the suppressed but beefy divisions that the Germans have protecting the objectives with. And finally, don't forget about those guards units sitting on the bank of the Volga, especially the one with the engineer, so don't hesitate sending them into battle for Red October and Univermag. Like most of the rest of the units in this battle, you are not gonna see these guys ever again, so if there are losses, it doesn't matter. In its current form, a race to Rostov is easily the most frustrating scenario of this entire campaign, and while the guidance I give here will bring you to victory, expect having trouble nevertheless. You'll still probably need a bunch of replays to actually get this mission 100%. So before the mission starts, make sure to build a bridge just east of Tsemlyansk. You will want to channel all that infantry sitting in the front line in the north to the south, across the river, and to the west. And by the way, speaking of pontoon bridges, make sure that Southern/Stalingrad front has that ability, and if you get an option of upgrading the ability during a level up somewhere earlier, please guess it, we will use bridging a lot in this one. So on turn 1, send all of your fast troops into that finger-shaped area between Semlyansk, Zimovniki, and Semikarakorsk. Make sure to take the hex with the bridge just east of Semikarakorsk, and take the hex west of Tsemlyansk and build a pontoon bridge there. If you have the command points to do it, build more pontoon bridges east of Semikarakorsk. Finally, there's one fast unit that you shouldn't send there, and it's the 3rd Guards Mechanized Corps. Send it south and west in a sneaky pincer maneuver around all of the defenders, and towards that supply hub they're being fed from. Finally, use those infantry divisions you have near Kotelnikovo and send them to protect the river west of Zimovniki, and actually send them to cross the river along the railway. I know there are plenty of scary German troops there, but that's the whole point. Exposed weaker units at Zimovniki will attract the AI's attention, and will make sure that all of those motorized and tank divisions will stay in the pocket you're about to create. But as you create this little bait, don't forget to push your best infantry, your veteran guards with all of the best specs, to the west. And the same can be said about your HQ. You will have to rely on its abilities to survive in the distant west of Rostov. Actually, the Stalingrad South Front HQ is a very good candidate for prioritizing range, because this mission is all about it. On turn 2, you'll see that the enemy will retreat from Semlyansk and probably do some things around Zimovniki, hopefully stay in that area. And you will have 4 immediate objectives for your fast troops at that point. 1, take Semikarakarsk and build a pontoon bridge across the big river. Make sure you dedicate 2 tank/mechanized units to this task and send 1 cavalry corps and hopefully 1 guards infantry division into that area as well. Objective number 2, close the pocket near Proletarsk. Use all of your infantry near Zimovniki to hug enemy units and block them with zones of control so that they can't easily escape. And obviously, as part of doing that, block the railway near Proletarsk. Task number 3 is connected to it, and you may even dedicate some of the troops you use to close the pocket to this task, and it's building a pontoon bridge just west of Proletarsk. This is a good place to dedicate one of your tank/mechanized units and your other cavalry corps. Obviously, if you have any infantry nearby, it also can come in handy. Finally, task number 4, flood all of your infantry and one of your better mechanized tank units into the area between Semyansk and Konstantinovskaya. Try to get as close to Konstantinovskaya as possible. If you can destroy enemy units on the way, good. But the AI has a tendency to use rear guard there, so make sure you move first and attack later. Right, from this point on, these 4 tasks become these 4 important areas on the map. And the first thing we should do is use our crossing at Semikarakarsk to get to Don Crossing and ultimately to Rostov, which is easily the most frustrating objective in this mission. You will not get decent supply in the area of Shakhty and Rostov no matter what you do, which is why you should have 2 mechanized tank units there and additional units so that you can actually shuffle them in and out and gradually whistle the enemy down. Plus, additional initial firepower will help you out very much at Don Crossing, which can be a bit frustrating if you only have 2 tank mechanized units. Like, having that cavalry always helps. And finally, given that Rostov, in terms of the deadline, is the last objective of the mission, whatever troops become free elsewhere should be sent to Rostov. Part number 2, the pocket. Hopefully you will be able to contain all of those units, and once they start running out of supply, don't waste to tighten the noose around them with your infantry. Clear Zimovniki if you can. It offers a slightly more convenient location for your supply hubs. Not perfect, but still better. And by the way, Don Crossing gives you a truck card, so feel free to use one at the beginning of the mission. And this leads us to part number 3, which is the pontoon bridge west of Proletarsk. The immediate thing that you should do is block both the railways that feed Salsk. Also, if you have the units to do it, block the railway bridge at Proletarsk just to secure that pocket forever. Salsk will need a bit of convincing to fall, but the deadline isn't too harsh. And if you see that you're doing well there, send 1 or 2 of your units west to block the railways feeding Rostov from the south. Finally, with a push towards Konstantinovskaya, you should try to do 2 things as quickly as possible. 1 is to take that supply hub right next to the town, and 2 is to cut off the defenders of Konstantinovskaya from the enemy HQ. You can actually use your Semikarakarsk force to do that. The AI loves using entrench and emergency supply abilities on Konstantinovskaya, so you need to prevent that. Past that, make sure that at the beginning of turn 5, you hold all of the hexes around Konstantinovskaya, I mean, like to the north and to the east, and then flood it with feint attacks and set-piece attacks. It's very likely that that motorized division will ultimately protect the town, and with enough forces bunched up around it, you probably will be able to kick out that 4-step enemy. Good luck! The Ostrogozhsk-Rossosh mission is a bit of a mouthful, but also holds a little secret towards success. And that secret is the railway bridge northeast of Ostrogozhsk. You need to get it prepared by the end of turn 1. In order to do this, give good artillery specs to the units north of it, do plenty of suppressive fire on the Hungarians holding the other bank, and send that heavy tank-equipped infantry division to clear the suppressed Hungarians out. With that bridge intact, you will be able to push your infantry from the north along the railway line to have easy access to Ostrogozhsk and especially Alexeyevka, which I find to be the most tricky and fiddly objective on this map. Holding the railway line also eventually means really easy supply, so if you can't repair that bridge by the end of turn 1, just restart the mission. Also, don't shy away from pushing to the west towards Staroskol. Don't expect this to be your main vector of attack, but with decent units you can actually outflank Ostrogozhsk and have more firepower ready when it comes to taking the distant objectives like Valuki and Pokrovskoye. Now let's look at the south, and here my immediate and principal advice is not to commit any of your fast troops to battle. Use your infantry to clear openings in the enemy front line, it's not that tight. This includes the enemy tank division, just surround it, corner it and destroy it, but make sure that your tanks and your cavalry division get as far into enemy territory towards Kotelnikovo as possible. The reason for this is, 1, the enemy will counterattack with their own tanks around Kotelnikovo, so you really want your top-of-the-line units in that area, and as I've already mentioned, Alexeyevka is the trickiest objective of them all, so make sure you have as many troops as close to it as possible by the end of turn 2, and once you wipe out the remaining enemy tank divisions and take Rossosh and Kotelnikovo, do your best to take Alexeyevka and then send your fast troops and whatever infantry is nearby to the west. I found that with a speedy advance in the east and you push from the north, the AI generally can't properly reinforce these distant western objectives, Valuki and Pokrovskoye, so the only real way to fail them if you get super unlucky with the mod and just miss the deadlines. Voronezh-Kastornoye has one little trick that 2x2 doesn't want you to know about. If you see this video go down, it means that the game's developers have paid me off to keep the secret a secret. Anyway, the secret is to actually block the enemy reinforcements in the west by building a pontoon bridge at the southern boundary of the map and then sending your tank corps into that opening past Staroskol and blocking the railway from Kursk and obviously those reinforcement spots for the enemy tank division. You can actually help this process by sending some of your northern infantry divisions towards that area as well, and this has the double purpose of ultimately destroying the enemy supply lines. As for the specific objectives, Voronezh is a stark reminder that you should use your engineers for set-piece attacks. 2 of the units surrounding the city already have engineers, so set-piece away. You probably will not take the city on turn 1, but make sure you do one set-piece attack because you will block the enemy supply and they will not recover from whatever suppression you manage to inflict. Turn 2, it shouldn't be too hard to destroy them or most likely force them to retreat. And as for Kastornoye, your immediate goal is to block the railway between Kursk and Kastornoye and position as many of your infantry units around that hex as possible by the end of turn 1. Kastornoye is a plains hex, so you're probably not gonna have too much trouble kicking the defenders out. Also, the large number of troops you have in the south should play the supporting role, advancing towards Kastornoye Voronezh and gradually clearing the way to Staroskol. With the railway blocked on turn 1, pretty much all of the enemy defenders will be completely out of supply by the end of turn 2. You won't have to worry about any counterattacks, and at that point your goal will become pretty much not killing your enemies too quickly so that you actually can get enough prisoners for that objective. And this is it for today. The second part of this campaign, together with huge last missions, is coming within a week or so feel free to pop in and check out if I've already posted it, or subscribe. I'm actually just a few subscribers shy from getting to 1,000 and that coveted monetization, because I really need the 45 cents every other year income that I would get from it. So click the damn button and see you next time. Cheers.